The quietest families often carry the heaviest burdens. For weeks, the parents of Nolan Wells sat in silence, watching the world speculate about their son's final hours while they waited for answers that never seemed to come. They watched strangers dissect his life online. They watched investigators release statements that raised more questions than they answered. And they watched their son's name become a headline while the truth remained just out of reach. But now, for the first time since Nolan's body was found, his mother and father have broken their silence. And what they've said changes the way this entire story sounds. His father does not believe Nolan stayed behind on that island. Not for 1 second. His mother says the phone came back to them with something missing, messages gone before it ever reached her hands. And both of them, sitting side by side with their attorney, said the same thing in different words. None of this adds up. If you're new here and you appreciate deep dives into cases that demand answers, please take a moment to subscribe. We cover stories like this every week, following the evidence wherever it leads and giving a voice to those who can no longer speak for themselves. Subscribe now and join a community that believes every life deserves to be fully investigated. 18-year-old Nolan Xavier Wells went missing after a 4th of July boat trip to Horn Island off the Mississippi coast. His body was found days later in the water near the same stretch of beach where he was last seen. For most of this story, we've been hearing from investigators, from attorneys, from a judge who inserted herself into the narrative in ways that raised eyebrows. But this time, it was Nolan's parents themselves, Christine and Elmore Wansley, sitting down alongside their attorney Ben Crump, and telling their story directly to the public. What they described was a group of boys who'd stayed the night together the evening before the trip, then launched the boat on the morning of the 4th. According to Christine, this wasn't unusual at all. This same group had done this exact trip before without any issues. She said Nolan didn't give her an exact time they'd be coming back, and she wasn't expecting one. His father later explained the thinking behind that. He said it was framed as Nolan's last hurrah before heading back to school, and they wanted to let him have that time to decompress, especially given how much football and academics were already asking of him. So there was no reason going into that day to expect anything other than an ordinary trip with an ordinary ending. Nolan comes home. Everybody moves on with their weekend. If you're finding this story as gripping as I am, drop a like below. It helps more people discover these cases and ensures that victims like Nolan are never forgotten. And if you want to see more investigations like this one, we've linked a few more in the description. Go check them out and subscribe so you never miss an update. Elmore has described this trip in other interviews as something close to a last hurrah. Nolan was due back at Southwest Mississippi Community College soon to get ready for the upcoming football season. He'd also apparently had a Division I tryout scheduled for the Monday after this holiday weekend, a detail that speaks to exactly how much he had ahead of him and how little reason anyone had to worry that day. Christine described her son as somebody who was managing a lot already, football, school, and everything that comes with being a student athlete, balancing both. This trip, in her mind, was simply him getting a little bit of a break before all of that ramped back up. That is not what happened. Christine described the moment everything changed. She said she wasn't initially worried when evening came and went without word from Nolan. She explained there had been times before when he stayed out later than expected, watching movies or at a party with friends. That on its own wasn't unusual, but then a phone call came in, and she said the second she saw it was one of Nolan's friends calling her directly, her heart dropped. She said his friends simply don't call her like that. That call came in at 11:07 at night. The caller was Warren, one of the boys on the boat. According to Crump, Warren also said he contacted the Coast Guard, though Crump noted there are now what he called discrepancies around that specific claim. From there, things moved fast, but in a strange, disjointed way. Christine said she immediately called her friend Tashima, whose sons Jalen and Javon had grown up with Nolan, going all the way back to their days playing City League together. She asked Tashima to check with the boys directly. At the same time, the group of boys started pulling up Nolan's location through Snapchat since they all followed each other there. Christine, meanwhile, was checking Life 360, a separate location tracking app. And between those two apps, something didn't line up. Nolan's phone was showing up in one location, his car was showing up somewhere else entirely. Tashima told Christine not to worry about retrieving the phone herself, that she'd go get it. Meanwhile, Christine and Elmore turned their attention to notifying authorities and found themselves bounced between agencies, the Sheriff's Department, the City of Ocean Springs, the Department of Marine Resources, who took her information, then redirected her back to Ocean Springs Police. Eventually, Jackson County stepped in and took over the case. It took a while by Christine's account before that phone actually made it into her friend's hands. And even after that, she and Tashima had to coordinate meeting up, first to hand off the phone, then again later to retrieve Nolan's car from the house where the boys had stayed the night before. If this story has you hooked so far, drop a like below. It helps more people discover these cases and ensures that victims like Nolan are never forgotten. And if you're into more investigations like this one, we've linked a few more in the description. Go check them out and subscribe so you never miss an update. Now I want to slow down on that agency runaround for a second because I think it matters. This is a family in the middle of the worst night of their lives trying to figure out who they're even supposed to be calling. The sheriff's department, the city police department, a state marine resources agency, each one apparently pointing them somewhere else, before Jackson County finally stepped in and said, "We'll take this over." That is precious time in the earliest hours of a missing persons case spent simply trying to identify who has jurisdiction rather than actively searching. And by the time Jackson County formally took the case, hours had already passed since that first call came in at 11:07. Here is where Christine and Elmore said plainly that they do not accept the explanation they've been given. According to the story relayed to Christine, Nolan made the decision on his own to stay behind on the island and catch a ride back later with a different group of friends. Christine's answer to that was immediate and unambiguous. No. She said Nolan was raised with a specific rule drilled into him. If you leave with the group, you come back with the group. She said if she had been in that situation, she would have told Nolan to get back on the boat, full stop, and if he resisted, she would have handed him a phone right there to call his own parents so they could tell him the same thing. She said, and this is close to her exact words, at no time would she have left someone else's child behind, especially on an island. When asked directly whether she believes Nolan was left behind rather than choosing to stay, her answer was simple, yes. She said she does not believe her son decided to stay on that island by himself. She said it isn't his character. Elmore's account matched hers almost word for word, but he framed it through years of conversations he'd had with his son directly. He described Nolan as widely respected, the kind of person other kids naturally followed, not because of what he said, but because of how he carried himself. He called him a silent leader on the football field and on the basketball court. He said he constantly told Nolan to stay with his group no matter what. He remembered specifically telling him not to split off from friends chasing after a girl. There are girls everywhere, he'd tell him. She's not the only one. He acknowledged Nolan probably got tired of hearing it. He said he used to tell him, "One day you're going to thank me for nagging you like this. You're going to call me and tell me I was right." And that is exactly why he says none of this adds up to him. If 3 friends leave and one stays behind, in his mind, the other 3 should have made sure that one person had everything he needed, his phone, his bag, even if it meant a little bit of friction in the moment. He put it this way, it's 3 of them and 1 of him. Maybe there's a little pushback, a little tension, but you get back to the mainland and either you're still upset with each other or tomorrow you're back to being friends. Either way, you don't leave somebody behind on an island without their phone. His closing line on this point was direct. He said he does not believe his son volunteered to stay on that island. He said he just cannot believe that. He returned to this point again later in the same conversation from a slightly different angle. He said he'd raised Nolan to be focused and that Nolan had a plan for his life. A plan that included getting back to business, in his words, the very next Monday and moving forward with his future. He said, if somebody wants to tell him his son decided to stay behind on an island, chasing a girl he just met purely on a whim, he does not believe it, not for 1 second. He acknowledged that fathers and mothers naturally want to protect their children and give them every possible advantage, but he said that's exactly why he's so certain here. He said he drilled this specific lesson into Nolan for years precisely because he wanted his son prepared for moments like this one. Moments where a bad decision or someone else's bad decision could change everything. Now here's a detail that adds another layer to this. Christine said the first explanation she was given when she was first told Nolan was missing was that he'd wanted to stay behind and hang out with a girl. Her name, according to what she was told, was Katie. But here's the strange part. In that very same initial conversation, Christine says she was also told that Katie herself was missing too, and that nobody in the group actually knew who she was. Sit with that for a second. The explanation for why Nolan stayed behind depends entirely on a specific person, and in the very first version of events Christine received, That same person was herself described as unaccounted for and unknown to the group. Crump has pointed to a related contradiction from later reporting. He says the young woman Nolan was speaking with has said that Nolan told her he was heading back to the boat to rejoin his friends. But the friends on the boat have said the opposite, that Nolan told them he wanted to stay behind with her. Crump's response to that contradiction was blunt. "Which is it?" he asked. "Somebody isn't telling the truth." Now, Christine has also addressed a separate and painful layer to this part of the story. Some of the public reaction to this case has focused on the fact that Nolan was traveling with a group of friends who were mostly white and questioned in ugly ways why her son was even in that friend group to begin with. Her response to that was direct and worth including in full. She said she and her husband would never tell any of their children they weren't allowed to associate with somebody because of the color of that person's skin. She said Nolan's heart was big enough to be a friend to everybody, and that the outpouring of love and support they've received, including from Nolan's own friends, is a testament to his character and to how she and Elmore raised him. She said, if anyone has a problem with how they raise their son to treat other people, that's a problem on their end, not hers. It's a detail that matters here because it shows Christine and Elmore aren't interested in relitigating who Nolan's friends were. Their focus consistently has been on what actually happened during those missing hours, not on the racial makeup of the friend group itself. There is a video that has circulated widely online, reportedly showing an argument taking place on or near the island that day. Crump has described what he says is captured in that video's audio. He says you can hear what he believes is Nolan's own voice saying something close to, "Give me my freaking phone. What are you freaking doing?" When Crump was pressed directly in one interview on whether that voice has actually been confirmed to be Nolan's, he pulled back slightly. He said there were kids talking and that there was clearly some kind of argument without fully committing to the voice identification on the spot. But in a separate interview alongside Christine and Elmore, Crump spoke about that same video with more certainty, describing it as audio that had been confirmed to be Nolan's, protesting the fact that his friends had his phone. Whichever version is more accurate, the core detail underneath it hasn't changed. There was by all accounts some kind of argument that day involving Nolan and at least one other person, and it appears to be connected in some way to his phone. And that raises an obvious question. If there was a confirmed recorded argument over that phone, and Nolan ends up dead days later, why is the sheriff's office continued to say publicly that they don't see evidence of foul play? Crump has raised another point here tied to Nolan's physical condition. He's noted that Nolan was a college athlete in excellent shape, and by all accounts a strong swimmer. His point in raising that is to question a simple, if uncomfortable, detail. If Nolan was struggling in the water that day with a beach full of boats and people around him, why did nobody notice or help? It's worth being careful here. Being a strong swimmer doesn't rule out drowning. Rip currents, exhaustion, heat, and panic can overwhelm even an experienced swimmer. And multiple people involved in the search, including Brian Trasher of the United Cajun Navy, have pointed to a strong rip current in that specific area that day as a real possibility. But Crump's underlying point isn't really about swimming ability on its own. It's about the fact that this happened in a crowded public place on a major holiday, and still somehow nobody has come forward describing seeing Nolan in visible distress in the water. This is where the family's account gets even more specific. Christine said that once she and her sister got access to Nolan's phone, they went through it themselves and they found almost nothing. She said Nolan was constantly active on Snapchat. He'd send her selfies, silly photos, a peace sign, a smile just to check in. So when she opened his phone and found no saved photos, no saved videos, nothing at all from that day, it struck her as immediately wrong. She said her sister even checked his secondary account, also empty. And she pointed out something important about timing. They started searching his phone before the 24-hour mark had passed. Since Snapchat content of that kind typically disappears automatically after 24 hours if nobody saves it. In other words, if there had been anything there to begin with, it should still have been recoverable in that window. It wasn't. Crump has said the family now believes both Snapchat messages and standard text messages were deleted from Nolan's phone before it was ever returned to them. Now, on the question of whether deleted data can actually be recovered, one legal analyst speaking on this case made a point worth repeating. He said he has personally helped prove a murder case before based entirely on deleted text messages recovered from a phone. His point was that deleting something doesn't actually erase it in most cases, It just hides it at various levels within the device that a proper forensic examination can often still access. Christine has said the family is now working with experts, specifically trying to recover both the deleted Snapchat content and the deleted text messages. It's worth pausing on why this particular detail carries so much weight for the family. Christine described Nolan's relationship with his phone almost as a running joke between them. She said his hand was practically attached to it, that he was always messaging her, always sending photos, always documenting whatever he was doing. For a phone like that, belonging to a kid like that, to come back completely empty with no saved images, no saved videos, nothing at all from an entire day at the beach with friends isn't just unusual. To his own mother, it read as impossible unless something had been deliberately removed. If you're still with me, you're clearly someone who cares about justice and the stories of those who were taken too soon. Subscribe now and turn on notifications so you never miss a case like this one. Every subscriber helps us keep these stories alive. And there's a broader legal wrinkle here too, one that's come up repeatedly as this case is developed. Text messages once sent typically pass through a carrier's network and, depending on the service, may be stored elsewhere beyond just the device itself. That means even a successfully deleted message on a phone isn't necessarily gone from every possible record. Investigators or Crump's own team may still be able to request those records directly from the carrier or from Snapchat itself, entirely separate from whatever remains on the phone. Here's a smaller detail, but one that matters because it's the first documented inconsistency in this case that doesn't rely on anyone's memory of a conversation. Christine said that after she posted publicly asking for information, a young woman reached out to her. This young woman had been on the island that day and told Christine that the official report described Nolan wearing black shorts, but according to her own photos taken that day, Nolan was actually wearing blue shorts. Christine said the young woman sent her the photos directly to show the actual color. And she says those photos do appear to have been taken that same day. Black and blue aren't colors you'd easily confuse in person or in a photograph. So this isn't a case of somebody misremembering a detail from a stressful night. It's a documented photograph apparently contradicting an official report on a simple, verifiable fact. Small as it sounds, that's exactly the kind of detail that raises bigger questions about how carefully this investigation's early information was gathered. This case has by now pulled in a significant amount of outside support. Civil rights activist and former NFL quarterback Colin Kaepernick helped fund the cost of the independent autopsy. Filmmaker Tyler Perry is covering the family's funeral expenses. Reverend Al Sharpton has also joined this case publicly, appearing alongside Christine, Elmore and Crump at a press conference, and Crump, in discussing why the family sought an investigation independent of the state, invoked Mississippi's own history directly. He referenced the killing of Emmett Till, noting this is the same state where that happened, as part of explaining the family's concern about how a case like this involving a young black man and a group of white friends might be handled. Crump has also said he hasn't personally spoken with the young men who were with Nolan that day because they have since retained their own legal representation. That last point is worth sitting with for a moment. It means at this stage there has been no direct conversation between the family's legal team and the friends who were actually on that island with Nolan. Whatever accounts have emerged from that friend group so far have come second-hand through statements like Judge Cole's or through what investigators have shared. Crump's team, by his own account, is working entirely without direct access to the people who were physically present for Nolan's final hours. After one of these interviews, a panel of legal analysts weighed in and raised a series of pointed questions about how this investigation has been handled so far. One analyst focused on evidence preservation. She noted that the boys called Nolan's mother at 11 at night, but the phone itself wasn't handed over until sometime the following day. In any investigation, she said that gap is exactly when evidence gets lost or altered. She raised basic questions nobody seems to have answered publicly. Did anyone document whether the friends had changed clothes? Were there any scratches or signs of a physical altercation on anyone's body? Were those questions even asked in those early interviews? Another analyst raised a more specific legal point. If there is a recorded argument involving Nolan and his phone, and his friends left that island with his phone while he did not return with them, that arguably constitutes theft. And in a missing persons case involving a possible drowning, law enforcement routinely has tools available like exigent circumstances, warrants to compel phone carriers or apps like Snapchat to hand over data quickly. He questioned why none of that appears to have happened here in the first several days. He also raised the chain of custody question directly. If the phone was in the friend's possession for a number of hours before it reached the family and anything was deleted from it during that window, that alone could support an argument of evidence tampering, regardless of whether the content itself turns out to be significant. There was also criticism of the sheriff's own public statements. Multiple analysts pushed back on the decision to say publicly this early that there's no evidence of foul play. Their point was that an active, ongoing investigation this early should be described as exactly that, ongoing, rather than closing the door on a possibility before basic questions have even been answered. One analyst also raised something about the friend group itself. He noted that from what's publicly known, some of the young men involved appear to have retained legal counsel without ever joining the search effort for Nolan. He said in his view that detail alone raises questions, and more than one analyst pointed toward what happens next. They expect this case to eventually move into civil court, potentially as a wrongful death or negligence claim, regardless of what any criminal investigation concludes. One analyst also brought up something worth noting about Judge Ashley Cole, whose son Warren was one of the friends on that boat. She'd previously posted her own detailed public statement defending her son and explaining her family's account of the timeline. The analyst's read on that statement was blunt. She said in effect that the judge was getting ahead of the story, building her own record early before more difficult questions could be asked. She wasn't accusing the judge of anything specific, but she said the timing and the framing of that statement were both worth noting. Taken together, the panel's overall message was consistent. Every piece of this, the delayed handoff of the phone, the deleted messages, the lack of an early forensic warrant, the sheriff's early public statements, all of it, they said, is the kind of evidence that tends to matter far more later in a courtroom than it might seem to matter right now, in the middle of an active investigation. So here is where things actually sit right now. The state medical examiner has already performed an autopsy. Officials say a full cause of death, including toxicology results, could still take time. Investigators have told reporters they suspect Nolan drowned, but that has not been confirmed as an official finding. The independent autopsy conducted separately in Washington, D.C. has been expected to produce results in a similarly short window. Jackson County Sheriff John Ledbetter has continued to say publicly that his office hasn't found evidence of a crime. But he has also acknowledged in his own words that people want answers faster than a real investigation can move. He said it will take real hard work to get this right. Crump, for his part, has raised the question of whether the Mississippi Bureau of Investigation should take over this case entirely rather than leaving it with the local sheriff's office. What we're left with at this point is a mother and father who do not accept the explanation they were first given, a cell phone that came back to them with messages missing from it, a documented photo that contradicts the official description of what Nolan was wearing, a video with audio that may or may not be confirmed as Nolan's own voice capturing what sounds like an argument over that same phone, and two separate conflicting accounts of Nolan's very last conversation on that beach. Nolan Wells was 18 years old, a football player, a son his father described as a silent leader, someone other kids naturally followed. A young man his mother says would never have chosen to stay behind alone on an island, without his phone and without a word to anyone about when he'd be coming home. His parents are not asking anyone to accept a theory, they're asking for a real investigation, and they're asking for it publicly because they say they haven't gotten straight answers any other way. There's one more thing worth sitting with from these interviews that I think captures where this family actually is right now. It isn't rage. It isn't even primarily an accusation against any specific person. It's something closer to disbelief layered on top of grief. Christine described trying to protect her family, trying to protect her own peace while strangers online treat her son's death as entertainment. Elmore described a young man he spent years preparing for the world gone in a way he still cannot make sense of. Neither of them has said definitively what they believe happened out on that island in the hours after 3 o'clock that afternoon. What they have said consistently across every interview is that the story they were first given does not match the son they raised. And until somebody can explain that gap in a way that actually holds together, they intend to keep asking questions publicly, whether that makes anyone in Jackson County comfortable or not. We're going to stay on the story as the independent autopsy results come in, as those deleted messages are potentially recovered, and as this investigation, wherever it ends up, moves forward. We'll bring you the facts as we actually get them and not a moment before. That's all we have for you right now, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe so you don't miss the next update on this case. See you next time, everybody.